Welcome back to this video lecture. In this segment, we will talk about election campaigns. A campaign is an effort to win the backing of donors, activists, voters, and the people who are already in office, known as incumbents. They have an advantage because they're already well known and they already have a system of support set up, a system of donors, people to give them money. And so that makes them the favorites always. In every election, the incumbent is always the favorite. When it comes to an election campaign, there's a big organization behind every candidate and every campaign. And you can think of it as kind of like a big company. They hire lots of people, volunteers. You have professional campaign consultants who craft campaign messages. They take public opinion polls. They reach out to the media. They make ads. They open offices in every state and every major community where they hire those volunteers who then go out and knock on doors and make phone calls and post those signs everywhere. And they leverage data about constituents from voter files or surveys. That's all public information. Again, they're micro-targeting, trying to figure out who they need to focus their efforts on to get them out to vote. Within that campaign organization, there are two different focuses. There's the grassroots campaign, which is people intensive. This is getting those volunteers out to knock on the doors, interact with people, organize rallies. And this is especially important for local and congressional candidates who are going to be much more locally focused. But then there's also mass media campaigning, which is much more expensive. It's more focused on TV, radio, newspaper, social media ads. And that's typically how statewide candidates and presidential candidates are going to spend most of their money because they usually have the resources, whereas local and congressional candidates don't. And media exposure, as you might imagine, is really critical because the more that candidates get their name out there, the more voters are going to be familiar with them. It's that process of getting more information out to the voters. Voters with more information tend to participate more. And there are a couple of different ways that media exposure plays into a campaign. First of all, there are town hall meetings where it's kind of like informal meeting. Candidates show up, they might have a microphone, they take questions, they interact with voters. Oftentimes, journalists are not involved, not grilling the candidates. The questions are just coming from the people. And it's a way to get some news coverage that shows the candidate looking like they're a man or a woman or a person of the people. Another way that media exposure is critical is through buying ads. Television ads are currently the primary vehicle for that. Outside groups and parties, those are groups of people, unions, corporations that are not affiliated with campaigns, although they might be supporting one candidate. And then there's also something known as free media coverage. Think about tweeting, think about candidates going on to talk shows, getting basically the news media to talk about them without the candidate actually spending any money. That's free media coverage. And there's been analysis of the 2016 election in which Donald Trump defeated Hillary Clinton. There have been studies that showed that the way that Trump ran his campaign, he was able to get hundreds of millions of dollars of free media coverage through different things that he did through his social media, and that was very valuable to him. Something else that's really important in election campaigns would be debates. This is an opportunity for candidates to kind of be on TV, get more exposure. It's something that's outside the campaign bubble, which is the day-to-day process of getting on the bus, going to a rally, getting off the bus, seeing people, talking to people, shaking hands. This kind of is a break in that process, and that really enables people to see the candidate in action on a national stage. We get to see how they react under pressure. They get to be questioned. We get to hear about what their positions might be, and sometimes there can be some very memorable moments. In the past, there have been presidential candidates who really made a name for themselves by how quick they thought on their feet or their quips, things they would say. It's usually pretty civilized, although sometimes the primaries especially can get really harsh because there are a lot of people trying to make a mark for themselves, so they're really trying to stand out. And debates really do have an important role in competitive elections. The most famous example, in the 1960 presidential election, where John F. Kennedy, who was young, he was 43 years old. He'd actually been in Congress for 14 years, but he was portrayed often in the media as being inexperienced, whereas Nixon had been vice president under Dwight Eisenhower. He had been a senator from California, and Kennedy managed to gain the advantage through this debate because he came off, very well presented. He was tanned, he was well spoken. Nixon had a cold, he had a bit of a 5 o'clock shadow, he was kind of sweating, pale, and voters were affected by what they saw on TV. So TV debates can really have a pretty big impact on the election process. Another thing that election campaigns will do is they are constantly taking polls to try to figure out what the public wants, because if a campaign is doing something that doesn't work, they need to know how to fix it and when to fix it. And so they're constantly trying to think about ways to have voters tell them what they think of their candidate, what they think of the opponents, what they think of different things the candidate is saying. So they're constantly testing out different strategies. This is a really intense process. It's kind of happening daily. There's a lot of money spent on taking these surveys and implementing new ads and new campaign messages. And the next step is to try to reach out to people and raise money and get voters to actually come out and vote, because that's really where everything hits, the rubber hits the road, getting people to the ballot box to actually cast a vote for your candidate. And the most effective way of doing that is having candidates go out and actually interact directly with people, having the campaigns interact directly with people. There are a few major factors that influence voters' decisions at the polls. First is partisan loyalty. Most of the time, when you have less visible races, people just fall back on saying, you know what, I'm a Democrat, I always vote for Democrats. I'm a Republican, I always vote for Republicans. Issues and policy preferences, that's going to be a pretty big factor. People voting based on a certain issue. Maybe it's because they want only candidates that are anti-abortion, or they only want candidates that are going to support Medicare for all. Candidate characteristics, people often will vote for candidates that share their religion or their gender, or geographic background, or race. And then another thing that factors in is the state of the economy. And if you look over here at this graphic on the right side of the screen, consumer confidence, the Consumer Confidence Index, is a way of measuring how people feel about the state of the economy. And when it's higher, most often, the incumbent, the person who's already in office, they tend to have a higher chance of being reelected. So consumer confidence and having a better economy usually will give a boost to the incumbent, although not always. If you can look in 2000, Vice President Al Gore, he wasn't the incumbent, but he had been the vice president during a time when Bill Clinton was president and the economy was really, really good, but he still lost. So it's not 100% solid that happens, but it's usually a good indicator. Paying for elections is a huge issue, and a lot of countries actually use taxpayer money to help the candidates pay for their elections, but not really here in the United States. We have had a number of court rulings that basically allow unlimited spending. Starting in Buckley versus Valeo in 1976, the Supreme Court introduced the concept that money is speech. That was extended and expanded through Citizens United in 2010, where the Supreme Court basically said that if you're not affiliated with a campaign, you're an independent group, and your spending is protected speech under the First Amendment, and you should have no restrictions other than you can't be affiliated and coordinate with a campaign. So basically what that meant was that we entered a new era of campaign finance in which corporations and unions could basically take unlimited donations and spend unlimited amounts, typically through TV ads. And so we are now living in this post-Citizens United era where the amount of spending in elections has really just skyrocketed. When it comes to organizing funding and spending money, campaigns have a few different ways that they can do that. There are at least six sources of funds. There is individual donors. That would be somebody like me or you. We can give money directly to a campaign. There are political action committees, which are established by corporations, labor unions, interest groups, or other advocacy groups. And basically, this is an entity that is existing solely for the purpose of receiving donations, channeling contributions from their members to political campaigns. It's like a little company that only exists to receive money and spend money for specific causes in political campaigns. And individual donors and political action committees, also known as PACs, have some pretty strict limits on how much money they can give, how much money that PACs can receive. But when we start talking about super PACs and 501c4s, they don't have any limits really. As long as they're not coordinating with campaigns, super PACs can accept unlimited amounts of money. These were created after Citizens United. They're usually created by corporations and by unions. And then 501c4s, not only can they spend and take as much money as they want, they don't even have to say where they're getting that money from. And that's why oftentimes those types of groups are called dark money groups. Super PACs do have to report where their money is coming from. 501c4s are only limited in the fact that technically they're not supposed to be involved with political campaigns. They are supposed to be social welfare groups, meaning they're only existing to organize around a certain, public awareness issue. There is some public money that goes into presidential campaigns. It's very, very minute. And then, of course, candidates can donate money to themselves. And then political parties also can take donations and spend money. And they're an important source of campaign funds. This process has now become, in the era of Citizens United, fundraising is pretty much constant, especially if a person's a member of the House of Representatives, where they're being put in, they have to go out on the campaign trail every 2 years. So they're constantly trying to raise money, constantly soliciting donations. It's one of the number one things that they're doing, and oftentimes that means they're trying to get what are known as bundlers to work with them. A bundler is somebody that they can basically, the candidate can say to the bundler, hey, I know you have a lot of contacts. Can you go out and find, 10 of your buddies who will each donate $1 million to a super PAC, and, commit that money to our cause. So, they're constantly trying to find these bundlers and get the bundlers excited to go out and then talk to other people to raise money. And once these candidates are in Congress, they're making more connections. They usually get the party behind them, and it becomes a little easier to raise campaign funds. But still, it's still a very expensive process. At this point, we've reached the end of this part of the lecture. And in the discussion question, what I'm going to have you do is I'm actually going to have you go to this website, 270towin.com. It's a place where you can create an interactive map of the next presidential election. You can choose the different states and project how many electoral votes they would be giving to a specific candidate. You're going to go ahead and create your own map of what you think the electoral college results will be in the next presidential election, and then you're going to share that, take the code from your map, you're going to put that into the discussion thread, and then just write a short paragraph, 4 to 5 sentences, explaining your prediction for how the Electoral College will vote in the next presidential election. Make sure you talk a little bit about it. Why do you think that this is what the outcome will be? So provide some justification and explanation, and then of course make sure you're commenting on other folks' posts. At this point, this is the end of this part of the lecture. I hope you have found this lecture to be informative. Thank you for listening. If you do have any questions, please reach out to me over email.